At the end of the 10th century, Abdul Qasim Ismail, the Grand Vizier of Persia, traveled with his walking library. As Eduardo Galeano recounts, this prudent and tireless traveler kept his library with him. 117,000 books aboard 400 camels formed a caravan a mile long. The camels were also the catalogue. They were arranged according to the titles of the books they carried, a flock for each of the 32 letters of the Persian alphabet. The story usually stops there, leaving two ways to read it. The first is to smile at the romance of keeping one's books so close at hand. The second is to gawk at the extravagance of the venture and the crazy practices of the super-rich. This is the medieval world equivalent of building an Olympic-sized swimming pool on your super yacht. But there's a third interpretation, and one that should resonate for the contemporary world. Perhaps Ishmael's actions weren't prompted by extravagance or romance, but by a dire need to ensure the preservation of his library and the knowledge and wisdom it contained.
During the Middle Ages, an Arab invasion into Iran resulted in sweeping changes to Persian culture and society. In a lot of ways, Ishmael was determined to preserve the intellectual culture of Persia. A mobile camel train, he felt, was less at risk than the library in Alexandria, which was famously burnt down. It's a fascinating and moving notion, isn't it? History 3UA3 is a search for an examination of modern corollaries to this story, ways that we've sought to engage and promote resilience in things that we value. I use Ishmael's camel train as an entry into asking bigger questions about modern society as it tries to deal with its own existential threats. What we're talking about is an investigation of vulnerabilities and the perception of vulnerabilities. If these days it seems easier to accept the prospect of imminent catastrophe, natural, technological, or moral, than it does to address them, then it is important to brace human civilization for catastrophe. And history might have something to offer, a chronicle of how past societies confronted this very same question.
I'm interested in what I want to call modern arcs, methods of preserving and protecting things and ideas for the future. The most obvious example of this is the story of Noah and his ark. But Abdul Qasim Ismail's camel library is surely another. Depending on how you squint at modern history, the Svalbard's Global Seed Vault, Voyager 2, the Galapagos Islands, and others all have archy qualities and suggest a massive industry to preserve material and intellectual culture that is a prevalent feature of the modern world. What interests me about arcs in history is that this kind of preservation act does two things. First, it shows us what specific societies valued in particular moments, and that's kind of interesting. Second, it suggests a deliberate engagement with the future. Preservation projects are practiced in the present, but with a deliberate eye on the future, ensuring that what that present values survives.
And this is where catastrophe and the future as catalysts for historical study converge. Putting animals on a boat to ride out a flood is a method of engineering or insulating against the future. And examples of that are historically important. More than specific events, arc design and their contents give us a special perspective into understanding the past, the builders, and what they believed, what they conceived, and what they imagined might happen, and what they felt was worth keeping, protecting. The central premise of the course is that arcs, as visions of the future, tell us an awful lot about the societies that created them. That's because the conversation with the future is one of the few universal aspects of every society. We're always thinking about, planning for, imagining what might come next. So I think it's helpful for us to read the past through these notions, these actions, and these anticipations. Join me in History 3UA3 in January 2021 to talk about history, the future, and historical efforts to preserve the past for the future.
Son, these tools are artifacts, endangered species left its tracks. So lock me up behind plastic glass in the city.